All right, let's bring in senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and author of When China Attacks, Colonel Grant Newsham. Colonel, good morning to you. Thank you for hopping on with us. So China has responded to this already. They've condemned this attack, says it damages Washington's credibility and are concerned that the situation may spiral out of control. So that's what they're saying publicly. But behind closed doors, what conversations are really taking place when it comes to decision making in key areas of interest, including aggression, potential aggression towards Taiwan?
Well, what they're looking at is this big change that's happened in the United States. Suddenly you have a president who has some backbone and did what needed to be done for the first time in 45 years when he attacked Iran. The Iranians have been at war with us for 45 years, 46 actually. They've killed some thousands of Americans, injured and maimed a lot more, and nobody ever did anything other than to send them pallets of cash and try to negotiate a deal. And here you had someone that attacked them. So China was looking at Taiwan also and thinking maybe the Americans aren't that serious. And this has raised some doubts in China's calculus when it comes to Taiwan, when they look at what's just happened in Iran. But of course, we have to see how this plays out, because China has been very happy to have the Americans occupied in the Middle East. That means you can't pay as much attention to the Western Pacific, to Taiwan.
That's a great point on how this could go one way or the other. And before this strike, Colonel, there were reports of Chinese cargo flights nearing Iranian airspace. What do you think that was all about?
Well, it could be. There's always things that we don't know about that happened. They were certainly flying things into Russia at the start of the Ukraine war, and the administration hushed it all up. So that is a possibility. But the bigger issue is that China has been the main backer of Iran for decades. And that includes providing a lot of money, a lot of weapons that the Iranians have given to Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis as well. And now China actually buys 90% of Iran's oil. So that's about 20% of Iran's GDP. And that's the real issue here, is the amount of support that China has given to Iran and used Iran really as a cat's paw, as a proxy to attack America's friends in the region, to cause chaos. And that, to the Chinese perspective, that works to their advantage. Now we have to wonder, are we going to cut off Iran's oil exports and force the Chinese to go buy oil elsewhere? Well,
that's a great question, Colonel, because yesterday Iran's parliament did approve a plan to close the Strait of Hormuz, which would block $1 billion of oil shipments per day. This is Iranian retaliation, but like you said, this would impact China far more than it would the United States. So here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday. Watch this.
Do you expect Iran to move to close the Strait of Hormuz to try to disrupt oil transportation across the world?
Well, I encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that, because they heavily depend on the Straits of Hormuz for their oil. If they do that, it'll be another terrible mistake. It's economic suicide for them if they do it. And we retain options to deal with that.
So does China do that? Do they call Iran and say, do not close the Strait of Hormuz?
They might, or they might say just let Chinese ships through, like they've done in the Red Sea with the Houthis. So that is a possibility. But closing off the Straits of Hormuz is actually harder than you might think. That's been tried before, back in the 80s, and the Iranians couldn't pull it off. But that would require more of a commitment by U.S. forces. And we don't seem to have too many allies who are willing to jump in, but maybe we could shame a few into that. So it's easier said than done. But it is a concern. Whether or not China will actually help us or do us any favors, I doubt that. We should give them a choice, really. Do you want to do business with Iran, or do you want to do business with us? You do that, and China just might act a little differently.
Yeah, so yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance said that China, Russia, and the United States have one thing in common, and it's that neither of these nations want Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. Is that true? And if so, do you think President Trump will ever get a private thank you from Russia or China?
I'm not so sure about that, and I'm not so sure the Russians or the Chinese really mind all that much if the Iranians have nuclear weapons. Look, they've allowed the Pakistanis to have them, the North Koreans to have them. Those have all been developed with Chinese assistance. And the Russians have played a role in this as well, in both of those cases. So I don't know that we have that commonality of interest as the administration might think.
Colonel Grant Newsham, thank you very much for joining us this morning. A Fox Business alert, Iran's parliament voting in favor of closing a major shipping route, putting as much as 1/5 of the world's oil supply at risk. It could cost suppliers big time, as Forbes finds that roughly $1 billion worth of oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz daily.
Cheryl Casoni from our sister network Fox Business here with the details. Cheryl.
Good morning. Yeah, when oil prices actually started trading last night, we did see an initial bump. We've seen that kind of come back a little bit now, because the question is, if they decide to eventually close the Strait of Hormuz, and it is not for sure yet because the Iranian Security Council has to be the ultimate decider on that, that means that 20% of the world's oil is going to be, well, shut off. This is a problem, though, guys, for China, because 3.3 million barrels a day go to China through the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. And if you listen to Secretary Rubio, who was on with Maria yesterday on Fox News, he says that's not a good plan for Iran. Watch.
Do you expect Iran to move to close the Strait of Hormuz to try to disrupt oil transportation across the world?
Well, I encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that, because they heavily depend on the Straits of Hormuz for their oil. If they do that, it'll be another terrible mistake. It's economic suicide for them if they do it. And we retain options to deal with that.
Yeah, so here's a real quick number from Forbes. More than half of the energy that flows through the strait, again, goes to China. So if you look at a map here, just to kind of give you guys a sense of what we're talking about here and why the Strait of Hormuz is so crucial to global supply of oil. It connects the Gulf of Oman with the Persian Gulf. But, you know, look, at the end of the day, the pressure could be on China to deal with Iran. What were those planes doing going into China? I mean, excuse me, into Iran, those Chinese planes. You know, there's a lot of questions here, guys. Yeah, that's right.
We were talking to Colonel Grant Newsham, who's become an expert on China, and he says that China could make that call to Iran, but what they could say is, you can close the strait, but just allow our ships to go through. So that could also be another real possibility there.
There's also another possibility here that's unfortunate. I heard you talk about this in the last hour on the program, is that you could see some smaller level attacks. It could be IRGC, small boat attacks against vessels, not Iranian vessels that are exporting oil over to China, but other world ships, global ships that are going to other destinations. And that's another problem. There are other ways that Iran could try to find a way to push back against the United States.
But I do think it is clear that China's economy relies on cheap Iranian gas, under market value gas. Something like this could hurt them. So to that point, will China end up sort of pushing for a resolution if Iran decides to close off the Strait of Hormuz? It certainly is fascinating to watch. I know Cheryl's going to be talking a lot more about this over the next 3 hours on Mornings with Maria.
We are.
Cheryl, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
guys.
Let's tell you a little about the significance of Hormuz Strait. It's a strategic location connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, and that's why it becomes important for transport. It's a choke point for global trade, critical for oil exporting nations in the entire West Asian region. It's an energy lifeline where 20% of global oil and major LNG exports pass through this particular strait. Global economic impact, if there is a closure, in fact there is a closure, would restrict trade and spike oil prices. So the decision has been taken to close it. However, back home in India, the government has said that there will not be any other repercussion and there is no need to worry. Iran's possible Gulf disruption plan may mine Strait of Hormuz, which is, like we said, the crucial oil route here. Deploy naval mines to disrupt tanker traffic, might spike oil prices, and then disrupt the supply chain to all the countries where the oil is supplied. Target tankers, ports via missiles or Houthis drones. Attack pipelines, storage areas, undersea cables in the Gulf states. This is something that Iran could be expected to do as part of its disruptive plan, its disruption strategy.